Welcome to the Stanford MBA two-generational wisdom bridge across 30 years. I'm your host, Catherine Keogh McLennan from the MBA Class of 1995 of Stanford. In each episode, I bring together one of my classmates, now in our 60s, give or take, and a member of the class of 2025, now in their 30s, give or take, and about to graduate into an entirely different world than we graduated in 1995. Back then, we finished our MBAs just as the internet was emerging. Today's grads are stepping into a future shaped by artificial intelligence, uncertainty, and we hope that we express possibility. These conversations bridge generations, share lessons, and spark reflections on leadership, life, and what's next. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by Volker Schmidt from the Stanford MBA Class of 1995 and Laura Kiehl from the Class of 2025. Volker is a seasoned investor and leadership advisor with deep roots in Europe's Mittelstand. He began his career at BCG before co-founding EMERAM, E-M-E-R-A-M Capital Partners, and later Blue Ocean Partners, helping small and mid-sized companies scale through growth strategy and private equity. Laura is a second-year MBA student at Stanford, originally from Germany and Poland. Before business school, she worked in consulting at BCG and co-founded an initiative supporting first-generation professionals. At Stanford, she's explored everything from HealthTech VC to women's entrepreneurship as a co-leader of Galvanizer, the school's accelerator for MBA female founders. In this episode, Volker and Laura share perspectives on European identity, career reinvention, and what it means to lead across generations. From kite-surfing off Cape Verde to navigating AI-powered classrooms at Stanford, their dialogue spans continents, industries, and life stages, offering practical wisdom and unexpected laughter along the way. Today, I've got Volker and then Laura, and I welcome you. Volker is in Munich, and Laura, of course, is at Stanford. So, Laura, it is Monday at 11 o'clock, I believe. What are you up to as a student in their second year on a Monday at 11 o'clock?
It is a very full schedule indeed, because this is our last week before we break for spring break, actually. So it's the final week. We don't usually have final exams in our second year, which is great, but we have even more kind of papers, group projects, final projects, all of this, which is summing up more or less by the end of the week. So I think I have kind of like 8 papers or 8 pieces due by the end. It's quite a lot. Or group projects, kind of all of this. So it is quite a busy one, and especially with people traveling and breaking for spring break afterwards, everyone is very much trying to tie the knot before they jump on that plane. Although saying that, it was so funny last year that I think that was the first time I've ever experienced it, where same time spring break, we were going on our GSTs. I don't know if they were having it in your time, which is a global study trip, as they call it.
Yeah, sure.
And then 1 or 2. You guys have like 25.
We do, yeah. It's a whole thing. It's so funny. I actually went to Australia for it.
Yay!
Which was amazing. And the first time that I saw people taking their exams on a plane, because the plane ride was obviously quite long and they wanted to optimize every moment, and hence were taking their finance exams on the plane. And I was like, this is just, again, such a business school thing to do, from kind of the optimization piece, but then also from the risk-taking piece, because I was just thinking, what if the Wi-Fi breaks, But so yeah, that is, I think, top of mind for many of us right now.
What happened to the little blue paper books that we had? We had exams throughout. I don't know, you guys. That's another indication. Volker, where do we
have them?
Where do we find you at the opposite side of the world on Monday night?
Oh, I'm just sitting in my little, very little office, like 6 square meters, at home office. So yeah, just had dinner. And had a easy day basically. I was with my parents or with my mom last night, yesterday. She had her 85th birthday.
Fantastic.
And so I returned on the last flight before they went on strike in Munich.
The airplanes.
The airplanes are striking. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
So I'm just starting my week, basically.
Now, you've just come back from when I reached you. You were in some exotic location, Volker. Where's that?
Well, it's when you live in Munich, it's not that exotic when you're flying in from Sydney. But I was on the Cape Verdes, which is basically off the coast of Africa, roughly at the level of Senegal. So if you're from Munich, you would fly to the Canary Islands. And then if you continue the same direction for another 2 hours, that would take you to the Cape Verdes. It's a group of 14 islands, used to be Portuguese. They're independent since the mid-70s, I believe. And
why,
it's
Volker? What's the attraction there? Why do you love that?
Well, they have two natural resources, which is wind and waves. That's pretty much all they have. Yeah. So I was there for 14 days. The first week was my brother, and the second week was my son. It was with some overlap. My brother was there for 10 days. And we had wind every single day for 2 weeks and waves 10 out of 14 days. So we've been kite surfing and wing foiling and a little bit of surfing.
How old is your son now, Volker?
My son is 28.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So he was born right after we graduated.
Yeah, well, basically, yes, he was. And we took a trip around the world, and basically,
Fantastic.
my wife, when we met, on our first or second date, somehow the topic came out to kids, and she said she always wanted to have kids before she turned 30. And at that time, I told her she can have her kids when she is 30 because, it was the MBA I wanted to do and the trip around the world. So we actually stopped taking care on her 30th birthday, and our son was born 9 months later. So he's actually from New Zealand, a souvenir.
She's from New Zealand. I love that. And you're the big kite surfer. You had some amazing photos that I remember that you presented to our sort of 25th reunion. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah, I do a lot of kite surfing. The next trip is already planned. In the summer, we'll be off the coast of Madagascar from a sailing boat. We'll be kiting there.
Gosh. So Laura, you came in. Tell us about how you came into Stanford, what you were up to, and what has changed when you're exiting in, 5 sentences or less.
A good Monday challenge for sure. What was me coming in? I came from Berlin. I kind of lived a little bit all over the place before, but most recently before the GSB, I always say I was stationed in Berlin. I was in consulting. So that was my home office, but I didn't ever have a project in Berlin. So I was just constantly traveling and had a project in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia before.
As you do.
Which is hugely interesting. As you do. Hugely interesting. And actually a great way also, we have a couple of people from Saudi in our class, and it's so interesting to connect with them on that and talk through it, which I absolutely love. Yeah. And then came from Berlin, moved as far as I could to the other side, to the beautiful West Coast, which I really, really enjoyed. Was, as I said, in consulting before, and really wanted to take the time in Stanford to kind of explore and see what's out there in the world. I didn't do that much in undergrad and kind of fell into consulting and really wanted to take the time to, first of all, immerse myself in this crazy world that is the Silicon Valley and the GSB with all the opportunities it holds, and kind of really see what's out there from VC to search fund, entrepreneurship, all of the above and all of the mids in between. And yeah, it's been a really, really good ride.
So the question that I remember all year people hated, at least I did, what are you going to do when you graduate, Laura?
Still a very hated question by literally everyone, especially the people who are recruiting right now. I'm exploring different options. I was thinking about one thesis I was exploring over the course of, I guess, the past year is looking into search funds and the community around that, which I found hugely interesting. It's quite an underrepresented asset class, I think, overall, but especially in Europe. So it's not that big in Europe, especially also looking at the numbers in Germany. You don't really have very few exits, very few funds around that. But the community here is very, very big. And the great place that Stanford is. You have all of these investors that kind of flock in. So, and they're right outside your door. You don't actually need to do anything other than go to the lunch, or BBLs, as we call them, brown bag lunch, not to be confused with another acronym. And it's been really great. It's been super interesting. Lovely community, very supportive. Super lucky to take some of the very renowned courses with Jim Ellis, Joao Risk from TTCR. They also do Search Garage. So really try to understand that space better, because I didn't before. And was lucky to also take an internship at a portfolio company that was acquired, or a company was acquired by a searcher and as a portfolio company of another search fund, and got to kind of work on hands-on on that one. So that's been very rewarding and super interesting.
Now, Laura, that is a beautifully answered. You have practiced that, and I can definitely see. I want to come back to some of those ideas, though. So they're interesting. Now, Volker, in 5 sentences or less, actually, let's just take you back 30 years ago. You went around the world, which was unusual, but did you also work after that? What? Of course you did. What did you get up to after you came back?
Yeah, I got lucky. I think you were with BCG, weren't you, Laura?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, when I was in Stanford, I was on a scholarship from BCG, but there were no strings attached to that.
Amazing.
But they did, because I didn't work with them before. I had a scholarship which just happened to be paid by BCG.
Got it.
And
okay.
Anyway, so they offered me a job, and they sent me a job contract, and all I had to do is put in the office and the date of starting and sign it. And so I signed basically for 9 months after graduation.
Wow, cool.
And decided
Can you send me that contract?
We
Maybe I could. I can send it to them as well and be.
And it was funny. The head of personnel of the Munich office called my wife. Actually, I wasn't there. He basically asked, he got that email, and whether I'm actually shortening my studies and returning early, or whether I do indeed mean, May next year. And my wife just said yes. I said, don't. I told her before, if he calls, don't get into any discussions with him. So she just said yes, and then there was a big moment of silence on the phone where he probably was waiting for her to say, well, yes, we know, and so on. But she just said yes and kept quiet. And then after a while, he said, well, if he would have been able to do that, he would have loved to do it as well. So and I came home, and she said, I've just saved our trip around the world. Yeah. So we went for 6 months, Munich. We did go to Australia, by the way, New Zealand, South Pacific, Latin America. We started off in Argentina with visiting some classmates from the Sloan program. Also, 30 years ago, we had classes, and I was only hearing one of them, but there was this class from Irv Grausbeck, who basically invented this whole search fund concept. So we are also, we had presentations from some searchers, and actually the 2 friends of mine who graduated, I think class of 94 and class of 92, they basically still running that kind of concept here in Germany, if you want me to connect you, Laura. And we're actually sharing an office.
This is the GSB. We're like not, you just say 2 words and you're already like making connections in the network. It's amazing.
We already love you, Laura. But tell us about search funds, because I don't actually even know what the distinction is. What are they?
It is essentially a concept where you kind of tap into the small and middle market enterprises. And you usually look for companies that have a established business model, that have established revenue, etc. And you have an outside searcher who acquires the company. Usually, traditionally, we've kind of raised capital from investors. You could also do it as self-funded one, so you use your own money to acquire it, which is usually less common because people don't have that kind of capital to deploy. But that's the simple idea.
And how do you find these?
I just maybe for Laura's interest, I think the 2 friends of mine, they have modified the approach a little bit. So they basically, actually one of them basically returned from Stanford, and he really liked that search fund concept, and I think he had some money. So he was actually hiring searchers. So he was hiring searchers and they still do that. And he was telling them, why don't we look for buying a company together? We present you as the new CEO, it's typically succession issues. The seller wants to see his company in good hands, and you are kind of presenting him the daughter or son-in-law that, he doesn't have, which can take over his business. So it makes a big difference when you actually show the person who's going to run the business already as the first meeting. Basically, so they would take you on the payroll and search together with you and help you find a company. And once you find a company, they would finance the deal and you would get 25% or so of the company. So very similar to what it would be, but you save yourself the running around finding investors. Plus, they have been doing this for 25 years. And so they know all the advisors, they have all the network, they have a deal sourcer. So you don't start from scratch, which, can take a lot of time just to do the deal sourcing. And they, yeah. So I'll send you the link later on. You can look up the website. If you look at their website, this is interesting. One of the arguments is that they have, we do long-term succession issues. You don't want your company to be sold to strategic, 3 years later. If you look at their website, it says, family successions, and then it says companies bought 12, companies sold 0. So they are more into, keeping for the long run, but that doesn't mean that there would still be a way out for the searchers if they want to do something else. The searchers get in for a few years and then they hire the next CEO, and then the searcher can get out or buy the next company,
Fantastic. I understand now because I've got a few clients that are private equity. I learn on leadership. I work on leadership but they love to get out and that causes havoc. Laura, how come Germany doesn't have as much search funds? And Volker could answer this too, but what is it about the country that you think it just hasn't happened?
It's a really good question because we do have a very, very good and very strong middle class, which is actually kind of the backbone of the economy. So you would think it would be more common because succession issues will happen anywhere, whether you don't have any children to pass it on or the children don't want to do it, or you just can't find the right fit. So it is really interesting. I think one is predominant theme, and I'd be curious, Volker, to hear your thoughts because I'm sure you have way more experience to contribute to this. But I think one in general is a lot of risk aversion, I think, is what is driving the country in general, which you can also see a lot of with VC investment and why they tend to be a lot smaller than in the US, despite, just like being a smaller economy in general. So I think a lot of it is in terms of risk aversion. And it is a daunting concept, I think, even here in the US to say, as Volker just described, it is a long hold concept. So it is not I'm going in and I can potentially pivot or leave after a year if I don't like it. It is a true responsibility. You come in as a CEO, the employees expect you to be there for them. The owner has passed this legacy on to you. So it is a true responsibility. And with that comes a little bit of risk to, I can't just opt out after a year, but you may stay 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So I think that is a main driver in general, not just pertinent to Germany, but in general, I think a deterrent to many people.
Well, we're going to come back to Volker on that, but what is it that attracts you? Because I know what that world of consulting is. I was there before. I went back, arguably because of low risk of me going.
Yeah.
Now you're going to jump in. What is it about
you?
I'm
not going to jump in if I'm honest.
Okay.
So it's just something that I'm exploring and looking at. I have been thinking around doing the jump, but also kind of my broader life trajectory. And one is that I do want to stay in the US for a couple of years, as much as kind of OPT and all of these things help. But I do long term, and this is also something that's been super interesting for me to kind of develop over the past 2 years, sense of, I never really felt that sense before coming to the US, but that I do feel like I'm European. I am a European at core, and I love the US and I love being here. But I think when I think about where my life will be, especially once kids come into play, which is still kind of on the far horizon, but I want to then build a life more in Europe. But nevertheless, really want to take on the learnings and life experiences that the US brings as well in this ecosystem and further that. So I've decided for myself to stay in the US for the next 1 or 2 years and then return to Europe. Now, that doesn't really align with the search fund model, as I just explained, because you need a longer trajectory for that. And I was bouncing off the ideas, also talking to a lot of investors around this. What kind of makes sense? Like, does it make sense for me to search for a company, now in Europe, both being in the US and like vice versa. And it just seems not to be an ideal fit with that time trajectory. It's not to say it's not possible, but it's just, you always want to optimize for best outcome.
We're going to change that in this conversation because you now have a base in high intelligence and context. Now, Volker, did you end up in Germany in almost after your world trip? You ended up in the Munich office. Did you end up staying in the last 30 years?
Yeah, well, we stayed in Munich. But first of all, we left. I was in a similar situation as Laura. I felt like we would love to stay here for maybe a few years. But, and I was thinking about going to consult into private equity or venture capital.
Okay.
And then we felt, but if we do that, both these professions are also more like a long-term concept. At least the incentive systems are very long-term. And so from that perspective, and we wanted the kids, or my wife wanted the kids to grow up in Germany. So basically, we decided to go back home. And then, well, at that time, I enjoyed consulting. I'd done it for 1.5 years, and going to BCG was kind of the easy route at that time. But I also felt, a few more years experience probably would help. And I ended up being 8 years at BCG almost. But then eventually did go into small cap private equity. And maybe just tie that quickly to, I had a class in Stanford. I'm not sure if that's still taught. It was called Creativity in Business. And
yes.
Michael Ray.
Yes.
And so it was a lot about thinking what you want in life, et cetera, et cetera. And we had to write an essay. One day we had to write an essay, and the task was, how would you spend your time if you were independent wealthy? And in brackets, fill in the number required. Actually, to ask yourself that question, what you would do if money doesn't matter, is actually a very good thought. I've done it many times since then. But back then I wrote essentially, I would help small companies grow. The week after, we had to take a look at our essay. And the challenge was, well, if that is what you would do if it wasn't for the money, think about whether you could actually turn this into a profession. And that's how I ended up in small cap private equity 8 years later. But that came back to my mind when I left consulting. But I didn't make partner at BCG. So I was forced to think about what I want to do next. The real scary part was that I had like 5 or 6 options that I put on a piece of paper and went up on a mountain to think about them. And the scary part was that the first one I crossed off was consulting. I could have made partner in some other consulting firm. And it was not because I felt they were all second tier when you come from BCG, but I realized I really didn't want to do consulting anymore. And if I would have made partner, I probably would have never even thought about it. Anyway, so that's how I ended up in small cap private equity.
That's great.
Volker,
that's super.
Be careful what you ask for, but it's fascinating. So, okay, Laura, so you guys are graduating. Arguably, you can see so many of the commonalities to where we head to, but you are graduating in a different, let's just say, political, socioeconomic, technological, and we've seen in the last month that, there's a reason that you may want to identify with Europeans. Tell us what you're concerned about and excited about this world that you're entering. And again, 5 sentences or less. Now, what do you guys, what's the big discussion about the world as it's emerging?
I'm really bad with length or being concise, as my touchy-feely group thankfully pointed out. So I'm going to try to stick to the 5. But first of all, I want to thank Volker. Like, that was such a great story, and I relate to so many things that you mentioned there. So came from BCG, and one path and likely path is for me to go back, albeit doing that in the US for a couple of years. And it is always, one concern to also tie it back to your question is, have I made enough of this experience? Mm. It is such a privilege to be here. For me personally, from, being European, which is, we're represented on campus, but we're definitely not the biggest group on campus, from being half German and half Polish. So I'm actually the only Polish or half Polish person kind of in the school. So it's a huge privilege to represent that from a kind of socioeconomic background as well. So I come more from a low income background in that regard. My family, my grandparents were photographers. My mom was a ballet dancer, so a very different background. Many of my classmates have. I love, what they do, and it's instilled so much creativity and resilience and kind of also entrepreneurship into me. But very, very different of what other people come from. The understanding of what business school is and how you prepare to get into it was also a very different path for me. I think when you look at my CV, a lot of it looks very common, going, abroad in undergrad in London and consulting before and then business school. But for me, a lot of that was very serendipitous. It was not at all planned out. I kind of fell into it. I didn't know what consulting was. I just kind of fell into it. I barely knew what kind of business school MBA and what all of that prestige was about. Actually, when I was 9 years old, I wanted to go to Harvard because I saw it on a TV show, and here I am. So that tells you about how little I knew.
Good choice, Laura.
Which show is that? Is that the
Gilmore Girls?
The Gilmore Girls? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. This is actually something, I have a daughter as well, and this is actually we are watching. We are still like somewhere back in 2006.
It's amazing,
so on that.
And I related to it because my mom is a single mom, so it kind of felt like I wasn't seeing a lot of role models of that kind of family. So like two women, mother and daughter by themselves is not a lot that I saw in real life on TV. So I really, really related to that story.
It's funny. It's a German show.
My daughter is visiting. We're often watching this.
It's not. I think it's on Netflix now. You should watch it. It is amazing. Yeah. So that's kind of it's a great show. I highly recommend it. And it's not cheesy as the title may kind of suggest, but so it's a huge feeling of gratitude and excitement. And every day I try to just really take a moment of presence to just be so grateful that I am able to be here, and I just love every moment of it. But with that also comes a great kind of responsibility, and like, have I done enough to really carry this legacy and this gift that I've been given forward? And that is tingling in the back of my mind as well as I think about different options post school. And I'm very grateful at the opportunity I've been given in consulting because it propelled me in very different ways in my learning curve. And the mentors that I found there were fantastic. But I think there's something around going back that seems like it's a step back rather than a step forward in a way. And I know that one has to really try and reframe that because we are in a different time and a different age, and you can make different possibilities with that. But I think it would be untruthful to not say that thought is always still around there nevertheless.
Laura, it's an interesting responsibility that you take on. One of the things that we noticed, Volker, and like I said, Volker made a presentation. We always have 5 people or so that make presentations every reunion. And cool. Volker, tell us a little bit about that, because it was a significant change in what we usually talked about 5 years out and 10 years out. 5 years out, everybody was, well, not everybody. It seemed like everybody was making millions of dollars off the internet. And 10 years later, we talked about how the dot-com crashed, wiped everybody out, but there were still millionaires. And then 25, or actually 27, because we couldn't go back for COVID, you make a presentation that takes a different tack on life, Laura, for Laura. And Laura, coming out of business school, I do remember that. Oh my gosh, I've got a lot to give back. But as you get older, Volker, what happens?
Well, I think, in general, I think a lot of the presentation on the 25th reunion were more, the discussions were not so much about job anymore, but about life. And, what is your plans in life? What are you doing in life? Not so much focus anymore on, what is your professional objectives. And obviously that is because we had already 27 years of that behind us and only a shorter period ahead of us. One of the main topics of my speech was that, or the conclusion was that I tell my kids to forget about long-term planning and rather take care and look out for the opportunities ahead of you. Because in the end, everything will be different anyway. And all the best decisions in my life were all done by accident. And I gave some examples for that. I was forced into them, starting with coming back from the study trip and the immigration officers wouldn't let my girlfriend back in on New Year's Eve. And I proposed in the garage of San Francisco airport, like not knowing I would do that like a minute before I did. And we had our 31st wedding day, last week. So, but that was completely unplanned.
The customs? You asked her to marry you? In customs while you were waiting to get through?
In the airport garage and sitting in our car.
But wait, so where did they prevent you from coming in? To the US or?
No, I was going to, I think, Taiwan and South Korea. And Andrea was going home to her parents over Christmas. And we both came back on the 31st. But my flight was like 5 or 6 hours earlier. So I went back to get our car. You probably remember that big red convertible.
Yeah.
Which we put the white hearts on for the wedding. And anyway, so I got our car and went back to the airport. And then Andrea, took her, I think, almost 3 hours after the plane arrived. And I couldn't find out whether she's on the plane or not because we didn't have mobile phones back then. And she finally, showed up, in tears. And they had taken everything she had apart and basically told her and shortened her visa from 6 months to 3 months. And basically told her the only way to stay in the country would be if we get married. And the next one I already mentioned, I didn't make part at BCG, which turned out to be a good choice. And then I managed private equity funds for 16 years. And then, I'm a grandfather now. That was unplanned as well for 8 years. My son was 19 years old when he got twins. And if him today, he would say that's the best thing that happened to him in his life, full stop. And is that, if you should more think about what you want to do for the next 2 years rather than what you want to be doing 20 years from now.
Amen. Amen to that. But I love the responsibility, or maybe it's calling, Laura, you can pick a word, that you have in the back of your mind to go back. And what changes, and hopefully this current strange environment will shift back, but what changes in the last couple of months in your view of being European and the identity that calls?
Add a question to that, Laura. While you're telling your perspective, I would also like to hear on what is the atmosphere is not the right word, kind of the common sense. What is the talking, like the discussions, like what is the view of the broader GSB community on what's happening right now in the US? Is this like very clear cut, or is it like you got the full range, or is there? I would be really interested in hearing that.
I would love to give a more nuanced view. I think one is, interestingly enough, it is quite unpolitical on campus, which is very interesting. There's actually some restraint to talk about politics, and I'd be very curious to hear whether that's kind of the GSB or whether that has shifted as some of the political and socioeconomic tides have become a little sharper over the years. Because I think that could be one aspect that people are almost afraid to share different perspectives because the climate is so heated already and you don't want to be adding oil to the fire. So I think that is one issue. One class that I've thoroughly enjoyed is with Keith Hennessy. I don't know if he was teaching back in the day, but probably not because he was in the White House. So he was under the Bush administration.
Yes.
And he comes now and teaches a variety of classes. But I took one class with him and it was a phenomenal class because it was doing exactly what I think we're missing in today's world, is discussing all of these different things, but very much from a non-emotional, very content-driven perspective, trying to bring in all the different voices and really looking at why are we disagreeing? Are we disagreeing on a values perspective, on an implementation perspective? What it is that we're disagreeing on? And you can usually find that on core, people align in a lot of things, but it's usually on like, how do we get there that they are more divided? And that's because how they see the world, what beliefs they internalized on what works and what doesn't work. But that is such a force to bring people back together from being more polarized, because you realize we're not bad people. We are not that fundamentally misaligned. We just have different beliefs on like how to make things work. Now, that is still work that needs to be done. But I think it is so much more heartwarming and better to just realize that we actually do have kind of common ground. So that is something where I think I've enjoyed that class so much.
What's the class called?
So I did fiscal policy, which doesn't really realize that has anything to do with that. But he teaches policy time, freedom, democracy, capitalism, so a range of classes, which kind of get you to think about these issues from just different lenses, whether it's like a fiscal lens or a more democratic lens.
There was a study like 10 years after our graduation. We were asked what was I think many classes were asked, like with 10 years after graduation, with hindsight, what was the class that was most useful in your career? And the winner back then was power and politics. I had that class. It was very, very amazing. Yeah, it was very helpful.
I missed that. I would have missed that completely. I'm going to go history, because not only living in West Berlin and West Germany in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s. Volker, you're in Munich, and what are you seeing? What's the shift now in the great European politics that we are seeing emerging? I mean, I was actually in Brussels right before business school working at the formation of the European community. And so I'm fascinated with what's going to happen now. I mean, do you have any ideas about, first of all, how it affects business, for example?
Well, how it affects business? I just described what's happening right now. It seems like what's happening right now might be a chance for Europe to actually getting closer together, which is quite the opposite of what some people are trying to make it. But we are basically forced, to cooperate more. And, obviously there's a lot going into defense now. We'll see how all this plays out. But there's a lot of dynamics right now regarding the European Union, probably becoming more like a military union in some way. But this really depends a lot on, how things going to develop over the next, 1 to 2 years. So this whole Ukraine war, etc. The impact on business is, I think, mixed. There's so many other factors going into that, this could go any direction, basically. You can see it at the U.S. stock market right now. Every time we hear some new ideas and stories and back and forth on the tariffs, Wall Street goes down, and and then they say, okay, we'll postpone for another month. It goes up again. It's crazy.
What I would hope, though, is, because I know the signals are mixed with regards to kind of business, and I know you talked about the military. My really big hope from this is, and I think it goes back to your question, Catherine, around what it is like. What is it like to be European, and what is kind of the hope for the future in that regard? Is there's a lot of angst and confusion around what is happening right now. But I would really hope that this is taken as an opportunity to also fundamentally rethink, what do we want Europe to stand for, and what do we want Europe to be like? And for me, that question is one of diversity is still celebrated, and it's a strength and it's not a weakness, and it has a place, and which I think is something, not just in the US, also in Europe and many other parts of the world, we see as kind of going against. But this is my fundamental core belief. We made big development and stride towards that in the past, and I would like to see that further. And I think Europe lends itself so well to that, to embody that, because we are different countries all kind of come together, and we are a melting pot naturally. We move, we're closer, we travel, we speak different languages. Somebody the other day was like, oh yeah, you guys speak so many different languages, right? We're like, yeah, because we're just so close together, so it makes sense. So I speak like 3 to 4 languages, and it's, in the US, everyone is very amazed by that. In Europe, that is totally normal, nothing special whatsoever. But I really hope for you to just take this as a chance and as an opportunity, and take some of the American optimism and kind of vision that, we can create whatever we want with our future at this point. And maybe we can also take this as an opportunity to become stronger in the business realm, to create our own hubs, or strengthen them, because we have them in many regards, but strengthen them with regards to VC funding, entrepreneurship, to become really that pot and not just rely on the US for that. Now, still a partner, still, be a bridge between those. And that's something I love to be kind of in that role, to be a bridge between those nations, between those systems, between countries and languages. But I would really hope that it's not just that these developments are not just viewed from a angst perspective, but also from an opportunities perspective. And that's something that has been so core to my learning at the GSB and then, in the West Coast and the Silicon Valley broadly.
Laura, you represent, I studied history in the Cold War and ended up, mainly because I grew up in it, but you represent, what year were you born? 1996.
Same as my son.
There you go. Fantastic. Okay, so you're a little bit after my favorite unbelievable day in history, which was November 11th, 1989. And I still get tears when I think about that. I think it's extraordinary. So your life represents unbelievable changes, and Poland as well, from where it was able to come to where it is now, and Berlin being similar, maybe mini Silicon Valley, And coming from East Berlin, I tell you, in 2014, I got to go back and I walked under the Brandenburg Tor for, I don't know, 100 times in tears. 100 times in tears. So, what a great chance. But now, here you are emerging into a world with such great things and also this AI thing. How does that affect the world? What do you guys conceptualize? Because we were trying to get our head around the internet. You guys are trying to get your head around this weird dimension.
It's so interesting because I think there's kind of, for me, there's like two forces that are at play, which is one is it is what the mainstream says, like fundamentally AI will change everything, every part of your life, every profession, like no life will be untouched by AI. On the other side, there's this, I don't know where it comes from, this inner side where like I absolutely don't like following the mainstream. So if everyone is hyping this one TV show, I will not watch it until the hype is over. So that is kind of what I see a little bit of play, but I know that I can't run away from it. But it needs to be embraced, even if if that is a little bit of a hype in a mainstream and it is in a bubble in some senses. I think one thing is like to think about what is I really changing. So I think one aversion towards this hype is coming from the fact that everything is now being called AI just because that is attracting capital. And every company is an AI company, and people stop asking, but what does this company actually do? What is the value that it's providing? What is the impact it is making? But it's just an AI company. I think that is one thing we as investors, as entrepreneurs, as society, as people just engaging with the topic need to kind of overcome a little bit and not calling everything just an AI company, but still refocus on what is the core value proposition in that, even if it is leveraging AI to some sense. So I think that is a very important distinguishing factor to just keep in mind. The other is, I mean, it is really changing everything. I heard you guys, you guys barely had the internet, emails, phones. And for us, it's now you use AI or, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever large language model you want to use for nearly everything. So whether it's like planning your next spring break trip or your paper or trying to understand what a cram down scenario in financial restructuring is. So like you really use it for like everything, or like drafting your emails, writing your talks. So it is truly used for everything, which is fascinating.
It is fascinating because we're still in paper and calculators. Almost. So Volker, take us back 30 years ago, because this thing almost is in parallel. We weren't quite at that stage saying everybody's an internet company, but it came pretty fast through 1995 to 2000 before the dot-com bust. What do you remember?
I just wanted, basically in 95, I mean, when we graduated, Amazon didn't exist yet. That was founded in 96. So the e-commerce business really hadn't taken off much, One of our classmates founded eBay, or was one of the co-founders of eBay, Jeff Skoll, and then later went into making movies. He was sitting next to me in that class. I think back then he said, "Well, he wants to tell stories to the world," which he ended up doing. And eventually, he solved that independently rich issue first. And anyway, I think everything was a bit overhyped, which led to the new economy bubble. And I think there's some parallels there. If you look at, the current valuations on the stock markets, they are only the last time they were higher than what they are now in terms of, doesn't really matter what kind of multiples you look at, was basically shortly before the new economy bubble. And so there is, we're certainly seeing some hype there. And eventually, a lot of these things will not play out. But on the other hand, there's so much other stuff, or so much in the broad area, like Internet 2.0, I think it was called, when finally it wasn't just an AI company, but it did have, a business case that makes sense, etc. Obviously, e-commerce and stuff like that was also driven by the penetration. And it's kind of a little bit like that as well, I guess, with once it's not just the early adopters, but everyone is using it, that opens up for new business models with like huge customer bases, etc. So we will see it. It will be in all kind of areas which we don't even think about right now. I'm not an AI expert, but my son has an AI company that he basically he optimizes processes in Mittelstand companies using AI. So I go jogging with him every Saturday, and he gives me an update on the latest developments. That's where I get my knowledge from.
It's truly amazing. And Laura, the way you guys even act as students with AI, because I've talked to a number of you, and Stanford has embraced using AI through all your studies and all, that's probably why they don't have exams, because you guys, but do you think it brings, if you compare your studies before you went to BCG and now, does it bring creativity to the way the studies are done, the way you communicate, the way you conclude? I mean, we had case studies and it took us forever to read the case studies. So if GPT reads it for you, it sounds like you have a lot more space for conversation.
Does it bring more efficiency or more creativity?
That's a really good question.
Or does the efficiency provides you time to use for creativity?
I think there's a mix in between for sure. I think it does provide, the efficiency is undeniable, whether it's the example you just mentioned around you feed it the case study, reads it for you, because truth be told, some of the case study is very lengthy and you can usually get the gist in the two sides slide or like pages that are provided. I understand the premise that is, you have to sift through a lot of the premise of getting these longer case studies is that in the real world, you have a lot of information and information overload and complexity that you need to sift through. But hence, I think it actually is a great use of AI in that regard because we have AI now. So in the real world also, you will do the same thing. You will be able to use large language models to pass down through the complexity. So you're kind of using, school also in that way to train that a little bit. So it's definitely giving you efficiency. The same with answering emails. I think the amount of emails we have to respond to and answer in these day and age is absolutely crazy. I think I'm not even working and waking up to 50 emails every single day. And not of all of them who need an active response, but even just sifting through that, I think AI can be huge lever to efficiency, respondents, etc. The second is in terms of creativity. I think it's definitely great in terms of coming up with like initial ideas and spurring initial ideas, giving you maybe like a list to think about or enhancing some of your skills. I'm not a great writer, so it is great to kind of use that and feed it some of it to make my writing better, frankly. The other is it is making space for creativity. I think one risk or one thing that I'm definitely at fault on as well is though you tend to over rely on it and outsource almost everything to it because you can. And you almost don't give yourself then the time to just think and be bad at things and just like write something out and knowing that this is not going to be like super great or just, like coming up just like with random ideas that maybe the AI haven't thought of about or that isn't super popular because in the end it is just taking ideas because it is a probabilistic model in the end. So it is just taking something that is already very common and often written or thought of and in the data, but you may come up with something that isn't as common of a thread and you may not have that if you just constantly rely on the AI. So I think that's kind of, if we're keeping the balance and the pros and cons.
Yeah, people have to realize that. As a grandfather, Volker, so you're seeing your son with an AI company. What do you think about this new phase? You can almost compare it to 1995 in a strange way.
Yeah, no, like I say, I think it will get, a lot of hype is in there, but on the other hand, there's so many applications, it will become part of our life, for everyone, just like everyone is using social media now, which wouldn't have happened without the internet. In the beginning, everyone was thinking e-commerce and information, etc. So there's so many other business models around the internet, which a lot of them only came after the bubble. And I think you will see the same with AI. Some stuff is overhyped, but there is so many broad applications which are AI based. I mean, I'm amazed. The stories really tells me on how quickly, especially the implementation. I mean, it used to be, my son tells me that programming anything right now takes maybe 1/3 or 1/4 of the time it took 1.5 years ago. And it's like really, and it's in all kind of areas, and he's doing like all kind of projects. And typically these projects, like with my old thinking, if you had a software project like this, it was like a, 3 months project. Now we're talking about, a week or two, like 3 days for a minimum viable product. And it's, just to give you an idea, he was talking to, there was one guy who was buying one apartment a week. And he was like, refurbishing it like high end in Mallorca, and then selling it to expats, etc., would use it as a second home.
Wow.
But all the sourcing for the apartments he would do on WhatsApp. But that meant that all the initial discussions. So he would only buy 1 out of 30 apartments he's offered, but all the initial discussions are over WhatsApp. So he and his 2 employees would spend 3 to 4 hours a day on WhatsApp, just discussing with the people where that would be an apartment they would want to buy. And eventually they would go for a visit. And they'd been doing this for like 9 months. And, when he told that to Julian said, why don't you give me your phone? If you've been doing this for 9 months, I just download your communication trail, and we use an AI we train an AI based on that. And, basically, and then you can have the AI answering your WhatsApp, and it will flag for you when it thinks this is a point where you would typically suggest going for a meeting.
So let it rip.
And he said, let's give it a try. And basically, so he loads it down, they send him a prototype 2 days later. And another 3 days later, that guy calls and says, this AI is doing this better than my 2 employees do. I put them on a half-time job now, and it's just saving 90% of the time.
The elusive goal is we've got to have more time with family and friends and go kite surfing. Laura, I mean, I don't know.
Which I have to learn. I can kite surf, but
yet.
Growth mindset. It is, it's so fascinating what you described, right? And it goes right at the core of what, why we call this the next revolution. And it truly is. I think it will fundamentally change how we do a lot of things. And I am very excited by that. I'm very excited by that because I think it can give people a lot of meaning. It's beautiful to be part of that creation, or, as your son is. And I think that is fundamentally so exciting. I'm also very conscious of what that means for, my kids, when I have them, and how I bring them into this world and think about how do we learn differently, but also different skills they need to acquire that we didn't have to acquire, which is around, when I remember still when I was in primary school, when I was trying to digest information, I was doing this from books. Then you had to learn how to get information from the internet and make sure that it's a truthful, trustworthy source. Now we have to do the same thing when we think about AI. And the most prominent example for me is, on social media, when suddenly you don't really know what of that is actually real, what isn't real, to what extent is photoshopped or created by an AI or not. So far, the challenge for many of my generation, which is Gen Z, is you're comparing yourself to people who have a filter or who have a perfect life that they show on Instagram. Now, if you put another layer on top of that with AI, where it's not just like you're comparing yourself to a great human being, but you're comparing yourself to a AI generated being that you could possibly never recreate because it isn't real. What does that mean? What do we need to think about as in my generation, but also, above me, below me? How do we manage that? How do we teach this to our kids, to others? And how can we use this great resource that AI is and the efficiencies we can get from that, but also manage the downside risk of that? And what is the effect on, kind of mental health and how we fundamentally interact as human beings?
Like the average, I don't know what the stats are, but probably average use of social media is for an 18-year-old is like 3.5 hours. That's one of the negative side effects of the internet, obviously, And it comes with higher rate of depression, higher rate of suicides, all that stuff, because what you say is really a problem that they compare themselves with, everyone only posts the great things on the internet, and that's what people see and they believe, and just...
No, they don't even need to do the great things. They don't need to have the fit body or anything because they can just create that by AI. And
yeah,
that's just something to be conscious about. I think with anything, with any great, you always have a downside risk of any invention or any innovation that you have. And I think the tone of here is not to say we should ban that, but it's just to think about, because I think that's something maybe Europe is sometimes a little bit quick compared to the US. We're quick to kind of ban and put in regulation, but it's more around what skills do we need to develop? What do we need to what framework, what systems, what support systems do we need to manage that risk effectively?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, interesting thought, whether actually this is like, I haven't thought about this before, but it just comes to my mind, actually the whole, what you just raised, with AI, these things get intensified in some way. But on the other hand, with now where you don't know whether this is AI, whether this is manipulated, whether this is fake, etc. The issue that you can't take for granted anymore what you see on the internet, it might be all fake, might actually soften the problem a little bit, because you're not comparing yourself to what you
Okay.
believe to be the reality, but to something that is not the reality, to a certain degree, which might actually, eventually lead to, people not looking at this anymore because it's all made up anyway.
What's interesting also about our classes is we span 4 generations. I don't know where you were, Volker, but in our class, we were at the cusp. Some of us were baby boomers. Some of us then became into Generation X. You're the
I
same,
just
Laura.
turned 60, so I'm a baby boomer.
Okay. So there you go. And Laura, you guys are at the cusp of Generation Y to Generation Z. So why don't we together do a sociological profile in, again, 5 words or less? So if we're baby boomers, I'm definitely at the cusp, right at the cusp, 1967. So, okay, so what happens in the shift of the baby boomer to me, Volker, within that couple of years? What's the shift? Where do you go sociologically? How you live your life in 5 words or less? What do you see?
In differences between me and like 5 years later? Well, I would be hard to point out any differences. Actually, it would be easier for me to answer that question for the situation Laura's in, like from the Y to Z, because that's where my daughter is in. She's born in 99.
Yes,
And
there you
she
go.
explains to me, and she's doing her second undergraduate studies. Okay.
Wow.
So what she didn't realize when she did this. So first she did geography, and now she does computer science. The only thing she overlooked was, she didn't consider, was that if she does a second undergraduate, pretty much everyone else in class will be 3 to 4 years younger than she is. 55, and she has a real hard time to connect to 21-year-olds. People who are born like 3 or 4, basically people who grew up with the internet. This is so completely different mindset mentality. Like someone in 2003, she just has trouble to connect with these people, and she just to understand those, and they have like totally different values. Like she often complains. She's trying to find the classmates who are like 25 years and older, because she really feels it makes a big difference in the discussions that she has with them. Yeah.
Laura, so that is a good question. So you represent the emerging Generation Z, as Volker and I say, but Generation Z. What is it about your generation that is going to shift from the Generation Y?
I'm trying to think of an example that doesn't just involve going from skinny to baggy jeans. Because I think that is definitely one.
Don't worry, you'll be back to skinny.
We went from wide to straight when I was young.
There you go.
We'll be
the
back.
Perfect measure. Go ahead.
We'll be back. I think there's a definite, I think in my generation that still very much embodies the attunement with the diverse facets a human fundamentally has. And whether that's from a gender perspective, whether that's from an ethnic perspective, a social background perspective, country perspective, any shapes in between. So I think that is something that is I can just feel that at least in our generation, it's very, very fundamentally core. It's a very belief that we kind of grew up with, that the diverse facets they exist, and they're beautiful, and they're to be embraced. And there's something to bring together to the table to kind of, so that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 or 3.
When you say our generation, you're now talking about, that's not including the people who are like in their early 20s now, or even in today's teenagers.
I guess not. I think I've never really thought as much in this like generational boxes as much. I think I'm kind of somewhere between millennial and Gen Z, and it depends just what I feel like on the day. Because I think, especially because I think there's so much more than the generation, especially when you grow up across countries and you go to different countries. So you could be even of the same generation and have totally different experiences and understanding of the self and of society. And you could be of very disparate generations and come back in the same country and also have a very different understanding. So I think I don't think I've ever really identified with a very specific generation. I think one that is still very much prevalent in what I see around kind of the people that I work with or around with at the GSB, but I don't know if that's also like the GSB bias, is this real intense wanting and willingness to work hard, but still have like a life beyond work. So it is, I know for a lot of kind of baby boomers or, it was like just work and like no life. And I think there has been a transition towards more life. But I think more life also means to align work more with what we want our life legacy to be like. So I think I think sometimes there is this accusation, and I don't know whether that pertains to our generation, the generation kind of after us, but it's that there's an unwillingness to work. But I think that is fundamentally, at least not what I see and again, I think there's a bias around proximity bias and who you are, so you're surrounding yourself with. But what I perceive, at least at the GSB, is there's such a willingness to create, and people work incredibly hard. Many of my classmates building their own startups or running their companies alongside a full-time study of 40 hours as anything else than to trying to optimize for not working. But I think there's a greater sense of trying to align work and your values and your life in a way. So I think that's definitely part of it.
Okay, so the end of the conversation. Laura, what can we baby boomers and Generation X offer to your generation, do you think?
I mean, in terms of offer, obviously so much, wisdom, experience, and probably also just a little bit of chill and coolness. Because you've seen it, you're not as frantic about some of the things that me maybe get because you've seen them before. I think I don't know if it's a request, but a hope that I have is to really keep embracing a global mindset. I think, and it doesn't really matter in what part of the world we are or what segment or industry, whether it's climate or AI or healthcare, pretty much none of the big problems we face and people want to solve can be solved alone or within the parameters of a country that, mind you, is just artificially put on a map, right? It is not a physical force or, a biological constituent. It's really just embracing that global mindset, believing that we need to work together across boundaries and countries to really make those changes happen, and that we're stronger for it. That it's not a kind of a lesser evil, but it is actually a greater force for good if we do so.
Laura, we need you. Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. Volker, you get to tie everything up by offering the 60-something hope. How about that?
Yeah, well, I think Laura's speech was probably great for famous last words. And, I was trying to chime in there, basically saying, I view myself, as being part of generation, or my preferred generation would be generation why not?
I love that.
And it's like, it can't be done or it's not possible, etc. And, and every generation has this, sense of, why not and challenging the status quo and challenging why things aren't possible or challenging why it's not feasible to actually, get the act together worldwide and do some global effort for climate control, etc. And, seeing that there's people in many places in the world, it's obviously an always selected community, but I know a lot of these groups who are really trying to make a difference. And there's this famous quote, I don't know who it was for, but to encourage Laura to keep going. Because maybe someone once said, never doubt that a small group of people can change the direction of the world. Actually, it's the only thing that ever has.
Thank you for joining us. For more insights and information, visit my website at catherinemclennan.com. That's spelled KATHARINEMCLENNAN.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the series so you know when the next episode will be as we continue exchanging wisdom, connecting past, present, and future through the perspectives of Stanford MBA graduates of 1995 and 2025.